Welcome to the channel, guys. It's Kiki Reader. This is the Always Reading Book Club, and today we are going to look at the Nikki Sloane series, Filthy Rich Americans, and the first installment in that series is The Initiation. So today we're going to do a deep dive into that. All right, so let's dive right in. So the book takes place in Cape Hill, Mass, which is one of the wealthiest villages in Massachusetts. It's right outside of the Boston area. Our main character is Maris Northcott. The book opens up with her and her sister Emily going to a big party, and the party is for Royce Hale. Royce is the son of McAllister Hale, who is the owner of Hale Banking and Holding Company. So the Hales are the big wigs in this town. Like, they're the richest, they're the gods of the town. So they're going to this party, and Maris really isn't a party person. Like, she is one of those people, she would just prefer to read. So of course, automatically, we love Maris. So she's putting a mythology book in her purse, and her sister's looking at her, and Emily's like, what is wrong with you? Like, we're going to a party. Why are you trying to bring a book? And Maris is like, because I really don't want to be here. Like, I'm coming, but I really don't want to be here. So, in case I'm able to, I'm going to read. So they walk in, they're introduced, and she stays with her sister for a little bit, just kind of make sure she's okay. Emily seems kind of nervous because Emily is kind of promised to Royce. So this is kind of going to be the start of something for the two of them. So she's super nervous. So she's making sure lipstick's on right and everything. And, she's just, anxious at this point. So Maris is like, okay, well, she seems okay now. She got a couple drinks in her. She seemed okay. So Maris is like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go. So Emily at this time is like 21 years old, and Maris is about 20. And they both attend Edison's college, which is an all women's college. So Maris goes upstairs, which is funny to me because it's like you in someone else's home and you're just, traveling up people's stairs. But she goes upstairs and she's looking for like a quiet place, that she can go and read her book. And so as she's walking, she starts to hear moaning. And she's like, what is going on? So she pokes her head in this room. The door is open, but she pokes her head in there and she can't make out who it is, but she sees this man's head, and he's clearly, going down on a woman. And she's like, oh my gosh. But it did turn her on. We do have to, kind of let you guys know Maris is a virgin, okay? But she is turned on by this. But she's like, okay, let me go. This is their private moment. Let me go. So finally, like maybe a couple doors down, she finds the library. And of course, it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. And she's like, you know what? I'm just going to stay in here for the rest of the night. So she's reading her book, and she's just in her own world. And she doesn't even hear when someone comes in. And of course, who comes in? It's Royce Hale. And so they have she's kind of like, what are you doing up here? There's like a whole party going on downstairs. And she's like, yeah, well, I don't really like parties. So that's why I'm in here reading this book. And he goes, well, let me see, what are you reading? So he goes and he looks and he's like, Greek mythology, what is this, for school? And she's like, no. And he's like, well, why are you reading it? And she's like, because I like it. And he's like, okay. He's like, okay, I get it. Because Maris has green hair. And she dyed it because she, thinks of herself. She loves Medusa. So she dyed her hair green. And so they're kind of going back and forth. And she's like, well, why are you up here? This is a party for you. And he's like, I'm not really into parties either. And she's like, wait a minute. That doesn't make any type of sense. Because I remember back in high school, you were always throwing like these massive parties. And he's like, well, that was kind of my way of getting a little freedom. And she's like, well, what do you mean? Like, freedom from what? And he's like, let's just say it just gave me an opportunity to get some freedom. So right there, we know, okay, there's a lot going to be going on with this character. And So they have their little banter back and forth. And so she's like, okay, well, I'm just going to go back to reading. Nice talking to you. And he just all of a sudden, he starts to kiss her. He grabs her and he starts to kiss her. And she's like thrilled because she's like, wait a minute, I'm confused. She's like, you're supposed to like be into my sister. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, I don't want her. And she's like, but I'm confused because back in high school, she goes into the story of what happened. So her sister had gone out. At that time, her sister was dating like a drummer. And so they'd gone to like this little dive bar and everyone was having a great time. And so after the bar, everyone went to like a diner. And so as she was going into the diner, she heard Royce say to a girl named Sophia, she's going to pop up later in the series as well, telling her that it was a great night until Maris showed up, a whole nobody. And so that solidified who Maris was the rest of her high school experience, because like I said, he's like a god. So whatever he says, that's how it goes. So that solidified her right there. No guy really was trying to really date her, really talk to her. Like, people treated her like kind of awful. And so she never forgot that. And so she brought that up to him and he was like, oh yeah, I did say that. He's like, well, I'm sorry. And she's like, well, it's a little too late for that, buddy. And he's like, well, even so, I'm sorry. And so she goes, well, again, go find Emily. And he tells her again, I don't want Emily, I want you. And she's just thrilled. She just couldn't get over the idea because she had pretty much in her mind believed no one else wanted her. So this doesn't make sense for this guy to want me. So he said something to her about her green hair and she was like Medusa. And she immediately thought he was being, mean to her because, eventually Medusa turned ugly. But initially Medusa was a very beautiful woman. And so she's like, are you trying to call me ugly? And he's like, no. He's like, you don't know the story? Medusa was extremely beautiful. And she was like, oh. Okay, so now she's like completely thrown. She doesn't know what to do, but she likes these kisses that he's, given to her. And so they keep making out and he starts to, rub on her clit and stuff. And before you know it, she's had an orgasm. And this is the only other person that has ever given her an orgasm. So then his phone starts ringing and he was like, okay, well, I gotta go. And before he left, he told her, don't say anything to anyone about this. And she was like, okay, really? Who am I going to tell? I don't have any friends. And he's like, don't tell anyone. He said, and wait for me. Don't give that to anyone. Wait for me. And she was like, she doesn't know why she said it, but she goes, okay. So then we jump a year later. Emily has graduated from Edison's. Maris is going into her final year there. And it opens up with Emily throwing up. So they're thinking it's because of something she ate at dinner the night before, because they had a celebration with her, finishing college. And so she was like, maybe it was something with the salmon or something. I don't know. And so she was like, okay, well, whatever. Well, this day is kind of important because Royce and McAllister are coming over to their house for a lunch. And so Emily's supposed to be there and she is in no condition to be there. So her mom, whose name is Delaney, she's freaking out because she's like, oh my gosh, like they're expecting Emily and she's not ready and she's sick and what are we going to do? And she's like, you know what, Maris, you're going to have to go. So Maris goes and she puts on a nice dress and fixes her hair, put on a little makeup, make herself presentable. And so she goes downstairs. And when she gets there, Royce and McAllister have already arrived. And of course, her heart stops a little bit when she sees Royce, because again, this is the guy that did all that great stuff to her a year ago. And so McAllister's like, what is she doing here? Where's the other sister? Where's Emily? They're like, oh, she's sick. She's not feeling well. And he's like, okay, well, maybe after lunch she'll feel a little bit better by then. And so they go through lunch, and all of a sudden McAllister's like, well, let's get down to business. He's like, so Royce and Emily are going to be married. And Maris is like, what? Like, how are you just gonna just make this be? Like, she isn't even here. Like, how are you gonna make these decisions for her? So she runs out of the kitchen, of the dining area. She shoots upstairs to her sister, and she's like, yo, you've got to get downstairs, because they're talking about marrying you off to Royce. Like, what the hell? Like, you've got to come downstairs. So Emily musters up some strength. She's still sick as a dog, but she musters up some strength. She puts on a little dress, and she comes down, and she goes to shake McAllister's hand, and she vomits all over it. And everyone has look of horror. He looks disgusted. And, Emily is mortified. She's like, oh my God. But, I mean, hey, she was sick. He should have left her alone. So the mom and their housekeeper, they're scurrying around trying to clean everything up. And Emily shoots back upstairs. So while Emily shoots upstairs, McAllister gets cleaned off, and then he goes into the study with Charles, which is their father. And so it's just Royce and Maris together. And so he's like, so how far along is she? And Maris is like, what are you talking about? And she's like, your sister, she's pregnant. And she's like, there's no way. If my sister was pregnant, I would know. She would tell me. She's not even in a relationship with anyone. And so he looks at her, and this shows her how naive she is. He looks at her, and he's like, you don't really have to be in a relationship to have a baby. And she's like, I know that, but I mean, she would have told me if she had something that serious going on. So he's like, I bet you $100 she's pregnant. And he's like, whatever. So she goes upstairs, and it was kind of like she kind of thought about it. She's like, wait a minute. She barely touched her food last night. She wasn't drinking, which isn't normal, because normally, Emily drinks. She's like, so, whoa, what if this is real? So she asked her sister, and her sister was like, I don't know. I haven't taken a test. She's like, but I'm like 3 weeks late. And she's like, oh my God, like, how in the world could you be? And you never told me anything. I didn't even know you were seeing anyone. And so then she tells her who it is, and she's pregnant from her professor, who is married. So she's like, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? And she's like, I don't know. I'm terrified to take a test. And so at that point, Maris has to go downstairs. And when she gets there, of course, Royce was like, what did I tell you? And she's like, shut up, So then McAllister lets it be known that, well, since it seems like Emily's not going to be able to do it, I guess this sister will have to do it. And she's like, do what? I'm not marrying him, What are you talking about? And he's like, no, I think you will. And so she's looking at her parents like, okay, are you guys going to say something? Like, yes, this is, her father's boss. But she's like, come on now, are you going to say something? And her dad is just kind of like head down, like says nothing. And so she looks at McCash. She's like, no, I'm not marrying him. You can't make me.